Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we're happy to welcome Ed Tarnowski back to the program. Ed, we've actually had to do a little bit of work here the last couple of weeks to get you on the show, but you made it. And for those who are meeting you for the first time, take a couple of minutes here and just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yes, absolutely. So at my day job, I'm a policy and advocacy director over at Ed Choice, which is Milton Friedman's foundation. I'm focused on national policy and also advocacy in kind of blue and purple states. So I kind of wear two hats. I'm kind of everywhere when it comes to the choice stuff. And then, of course, I am a contributor at Young Voices, where I write, articles relating to education and varying a number of other topics like this one.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a topic that I know a lot of people have had on their minds, although maybe they have slept and forgotten. Oh, that's right. Crime is a problem in some of
Yeah.
our American federal agents. We've seen National Guard troops sent to some of the cities because of crime problems. I'm looking at your article here from realclearpolitics.com. The American city cannot blossom in lawlessness. And let's quantify that term a little bit. And when we talk about lawlessness in American cities, what are some examples of what that looks like?
Right. And I want to preface this with saying, I live in DC these days. I'm from a small town, but chose to live in a city because of what cities have to offer. I mean, America is the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. Our cities should be thriving places for culture, innovation, and doing different things. And I also love the walkability. My favorite cafe is just a block away. I'm approaching this from the standpoint of wanting our cities to thrive, being a good place. I'm an advocate for a lot of urbanist reforms that make our cities more friendly to more walkable, more high quality transit options. However, none of this matters if people don't feel comfortable enough to be in our cities because of crime and antisocial behavior. And what we're seeing is in our cities, and I think this is one of the largest problems, is small cohort of repeat offenders committing an oversized amount of the crime in cities. And if we were to tackle that issue with that small cohort, I'm convinced that life would vastly improve for the community as a whole, which seems to be forgotten too often in when we're talking about criminal justice policy.
Ed, I have to bounce this one off you. Just I don't know if you have seen this or not. I think it was Charlie Sheen talking with Joe Rogan about crime and cities. And
Oh,
I thought this was actually very insightful
I
for
need to watch
Charlie
this.
Sheen. I've kind of, I've kind of written him off as a party boy. What would he know? But he says, really, if you really want to break it down, he goes, you look at these major American cities, there's probably about 600 people, give or take, in each of those cities who are responsible for the vast majority of the
Right.
crime that takes place there. So he says, what we need to do is figure out who those 600 are, round them up, and we'll have a special building just for them, the 600 building or something. And I
Fascinating.
went, actually, that's one of the smarter things I think I've heard him say.
Charlie Sheen, I never would have guessed. Interesting.
Right?
I need to go watch this.
But you make a good point. If we want cities to thrive, they can't be lawless places. So talk to me a little bit about what has happened that has allowed that small consort of criminals to have such an outsized impact. What's taking place in the upper levels of officialdom that makes
Mhm.
that possible?
Right. Well, what we're seeing is, and look, and I think it is very important. We had to approach criminal justice from a place of human dignity, and you do want to have a fair punishment for the crime. However, that doesn't mean no punishment. And what we're seeing too often is people are committing crimes over and over. Like I said, they're repeat offenders. In New York, for example, in 2022, we saw 30% of the city's 22,000 shoplifting arrests were committed by just 327 people, together racking up more than 6,600 busts. Felony assaults by repeat offenders have surged over 146% over the past 6 years, with suspects with three or more arrests charged 442 times in 2024. So what we're seeing here is people are continuing to commit the crimes. We're seeing those tasked with prosecuting, not doing so much of that, letting them back on the streets too often, even though they're committing these crimes often over and over again, in the name of compassion. And I do think that a lot of this is well intentioned, but what we're seeing is what the research shows is it's a failure. We're seeing it's sending a signal that you can get away with these things, so people are going to keep doing them. It's encouraging, especially in DC, for example, a lot of young people to go out there and commit crimes because they are especially let off with the slap on the wrist for oftentimes egregious crimes, including murder in the city of DC. You're not doing them any favors, and it's not compassionate to teach them that you can just get away with this, and it's the wrong signal to send, and it's leading to crimes continuing to be committed over and over again by a small cohort of repeat offenders.
Talk to me about what needs to happen. Yeah, I know in your article you list at least three things that state and city leaders will need to do if they want to change course, if they want to restore public faith. What are those things?
Right. Well, number one, I think, and this speaks more to the antisocial behavior aspect of things, like chronic homelessness, drug use in public spaces like transit and parks. Um, as I mentioned in the article, we saw there was a group that did testing in transit, transit buses in the Pacific Northwest. They tested for both methamphetamines and fentanyl. 100% of the air samples came back positive for methamphetamines. I think it was also I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but a significant percentage, I believe more than half, were tested positive in the air samples for fentanyl as well. That's sending the
Wow.
right signals. And so I think number one, when it comes to that antisocial behavior, um, it's kind of I break it down to three, but this one's kind of a two-part. It's we need to significantly strengthen mental health services in this country because it's not compassionate for people to just be left out on the streets, um, you know, walking around aimlessly, oftentimes very troubled. So strengthen mental health services. Two, in extreme cases, I do think we need to revisit the idea of court enforced treatment. And of course, we need to approach that with the recognition and understanding of the mistakes made in the past. And there were many mistakes made in the past with this. But there's a way to do this with full respect for human dignity and the rule of law and for due process. But this is something that I think needs to be spoken about much more. I think we overcorrected when so I think we need to have another conversation about how we can approach this from a humane standpoint in extreme
For,
cases.
Forgive me for asking for this
Yeah.
clarification, but I just want to make sure when I hear the term long-term court-ordered
Mhm.
treatment, the word commitment, as in they're being committed to perhaps a mental health facility, is that in the same vein of what you're suggesting? I just want to make sure I'm on the same page.
Yes, you're absolutely right. No, that's exactly right. And again, I think there were many mistakes made, and we have to remember those. However, it is not humane to just leave people in the streets who are not mentally fit to be taking care of themselves. So it is a conversation that needs to be had again. And then three, of course, crazy idea, hold individuals accountable for their own actions. And this comes back to the crime aspect of things where, I mean, you can't just be letting people getting away, even with shoplifting. I mean, talk about violent crime, which is the most important, but it's just as important to, you can't just have fare evaders, for example, just jumping over. It's leading to people see that and it's they think, oh well, if they're getting away with that, then why not do this? So I think we do have to get down to holding individuals accountable for their actions, whether it be violent crime or other types of crime. It's not sending the right signal when people are getting away with this. People are seeing others get away with this. It's weakening the deterrent that really needs to be there. And I think once people know that there are consequences again, and what we have seen this. It's not just what I think. We have seen when people are held accountable for their actions, again, the level of deterrence is restored and crime does come down.
Again, we are talking with Ed Tarnowski. He's a writer for Young Voices, as well as a policy and advocacy, or I'm sorry, a policy advocacy director at Ed Choice. Ed, for people who want to follow you, where can they find you on social media?
Absolutely. So you can always find me on Twitter/X.com at Ed Tarnowski. Happy to interact with you there, but feel free to follow me.
Thank you so much for your time today. Looking forward to our next conversation.
It's always a pleasure to be on.
And we are back on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Kevin Garcia-Galindo to the program. Kevin, this is your first time joining us as a Young Voices contributor. Take a few moments to tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. My name is Kevin Garcia-Galindo. I graduated from Davidson College, class of 2024, approaching almost 2 years now. And, in my previous work, I have extensive experience in journalism. Started out at the Daily Caller, actually, the Carolina Journal, where my most recent op-ed was just published. And then also, lastly, Reason Magazine.
All right. Well, look, I have to admit, you opened my eyes to something. I'm familiar with the one big beautiful bill that was passed this last summer, and I remember it was a big deal and there was a lot in it. But something that escaped my attention was that there's in that bill an opt-in federal tax credit scholarship program. Now I understand there's a lot of stuff in there, but I really hadn't heard much about that. What can you tell me about this particular program and what does it portend?
Yeah, exactly. One quick correction, because this happens. It's actually called the Working Families Tax Cuts bill, as the Republicans have been trying to market it as recently. But with the specific federal choice tax credit program, it's essentially a program that allows donors to receive a tax credit up to $1,700 as long as they donated to a scholarship granting organization, which in turn has to use those funds, at least 90% of them, towards giving scholarships to lower and middle income students. And states have to voluntarily opt in into this program. And so the larger fight that is currently going on is, which states are going to choose to opt in or not, and how that's going to affect their already existing school choice programs.
Okay. So I have to ask you then, Kevin, how receptive are most states to this? I know you can't answer for all of them, but are we seeing a lot of states opting into this particular program?
Mhm. We've seen most red states with existing school choice programs, at least in the stage of passing bills through their House or state Senate to opt in into the program. In the case of North Carolina, the governor has signaled, who's Democratic, by the way, Governor Josh Stein, signaled that he's receptive to it, but he vetoed the bill preemptively, waiting for, more guidance, which the federal government has said is supposedly coming in the coming months. But there are a lot of caveats with that, specifically because um, how this sort of plays into the larger school choice programs that each state has um, could have a lot of negative medium to long term effects, which is actually what my op-ed is about.
So when you tell me that Governor Stein vetoed the bill because he was waiting for further instruction or more direction on it. Um, okay, I want you to translate that into non-political person speak. What does he mean by that? I mean, he could mean anything. I want the federal government to tell me, what to do, or the legislature or whatever in the state to tell me. Or is it just that he's opposed to school choice, and this is a convenient excuse to stand behind and say, well, we don't really know what this will do.
Mhm. Well, the larger fight really is really around which schools are going to be allowed to receive these funds. Within the federal tax credit program, there's sort of mixed signaling on who exactly is going to have the power over to decide, what are the requirements for the schools to receive these scholarships, and like which um, scholarship granting organizations are going to be allowed. States in the opt-in process, or after they opt in, have to send in a list of qualifying scholarship granting organizations that are going to be allowed to receive these donations. But at the end of the day, it's actually the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury who actually makes the decision on which organizations are going to be allowed to hand over these scholarships. So there's right now, especially with the Trump organization, flexing its muscles around, higher education, a lot of free speech and education issues. My thought is really that Governor Stein is really waiting on how restrictive is the Trump administration going to be around, where these scholarships are going. And that's really going to, color his decision later on.
Interesting. It's funny. I noticed in your article you mentioned that Governor Stein criticized the idea of funds following the student. And in fact, he called it a giveaway to wealthy parents. And I am pretty sure I've heard that rhetoric in other states too, where school choice is coming in. Let me ask you this, Kevin. Um, from what you've described, this sounds a little bit top heavy in the sense that it's from the federal level on down. It sounds like there's a lot of there's a lot of interference from higher up. Is there any way that they can simplify this federal tax credit scholarship program where it's not quite so dependent on federal input as to how and where it can be applied, or for that matter, is that just up to the states to pursue school choice on their own, minus without the benefit of this program?
Well, as it currently stands, there's around 22 states that actually have school choice programs to begin with, in the form of vouchers or tax credits at the state level. But actually, this is just one of the sort of negatives that comes with, this federal government overreach of, at the same time that you're expanding school choice, you're also opening up so many venues for the federal government to actually, in the future, change of
Right.
administration to actually enforce certain decisions on the state governments. In the article, I gave the example of Biden not funding weapons or like arms trainings, which
Mm-hmm.
included things like archery, for example, in public schools, and also the current fight that the Trump administration is wagering in Northern Virginia schools over transgender policies. So, this is sort of just one of the trade-offs that you have to take if you want to expand school choice through the federal avenue.
Well, and I think you point out in the article too, it's the idea of um, giving more of the funding responsibilities and, of course, the control that comes with those dollars to the federal government. And you have to wonder, why would school administrators willingly stick their head into that noose if they knew that, sure, we're going to get more money, but it's going to come with strings attached?
Exactly.
So is there any place that is that's pushing back against this tax credit scholarship program? I mean, I know that you mentioned 22 of these states have school choice or tax credit programs. Um, are other states considering coming on board, or are they pretty much dedicated to nope, we do it the way we do it, and we're not interested in change?
Yeah, I didn't include this in the article because it was sort of superfluous, but there really are a lot of parallels to sort of the Obamacare Medicaid example of like expanding it, which is just, the issue with a lot of these federal programs, which is, no matter how much of, the responsible choice would be to, keep these programs state funded for the sake of security. And sustainability, when the federal government is essentially handing out free money, which in turn frees up state money, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, it is really hard to turn that down.
Again, we are talking with Kevin Garcia-Galindo. He is a Young Voices contributor, and great topic, by the way. This is one that more people should be discussing. Where can people find you and follow you on social media, Kevin?
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter, Kevin VN dot X dot GG. That's my handle.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Joseph T. McFadden back to the program. Joseph, it's been a while since we talked. For people who are meeting you for the very first time, take a moment here. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, I am a writer and commentator with Young Voices. I'm also the Blue co-chair, meaning the more liberal-leaning co-president of the Braver Angels chapter of New York City, which is an organization devoted to political depolarization. I also host the In Response podcast, and I paint, as you can see behind me. So I'm a busy guy.
Yeah, well, and you apparently have some talent in all of those areas. I'm looking at an article you've written for counterpunch.org, and it's just titled Beyond Opioids. But I'll tell you, I'm very interested in hearing about this, especially when I see the subtitle, A New Medication Could Relieve Pain Without Addiction Risk, but Red Tape is Getting in the Way. Okay, you have my attention. I know that there's this incredible back and forth, push and pull between doctors who are trying to work with patients and manage pain versus, concerns over addiction, or for that matter, over prescription. The DEA gets involved and the doctors feel like they're at risk. Talk to me about this new medication, and then let's talk about what's holding it up.
Well, the new medication is called Jorvanax, and it's a non-opioid pain medication that seems to work fairly well for short-term pain, acute pain. It has not been widely tested for long-term pain, but it doesn't seem to be addictive. So because it hasn't been tested for long-term pain, even for people for whom it works, it's very difficult for them to get a long-term prescription. And pre-authorization is also required, and that takes a really long time. There are health insurance policies that require patients to literally fail first on opioids before trying a more expensive alternative, because Jorvanax is more expensive, so insurance companies don't want to cover it. So there are all sorts of reasons why it's difficult for non-opioid alternatives, but generally speaking, the system just simply doesn't prefer them. And that's a problem because they're so addictive. If they weren't addictive, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Right. I'm just blown away that there's a non-addictive alternative, and that there's not more clamor to try to bring that, to where it can be used more widely. I mean, I get, if it's new, there are things that have to be learned along the way, but it sure sounds like the regulators are standing in the way of what could be actual progress here.
Yeah, that, and also health insurance policies too. I mean, I understand a need to test a medication for a longer period of time, but I think that something that we learned from COVID is that maybe we should allow people to be willing to do something like that if they're willing to take the risk. We didn't really embrace challenge trials with COVID. Maybe people should have the option, if this is working for them, to participate in something like that. So I, you know, I think we just learned the wrong lessons from a few years ago and haven't really adapted ourselves. And again, I mean, that in particular is the one piece of red tape that I'm at least more understanding about. But I think it's kind of ridiculous that insurance companies are preferring something so addictive. That is something that I don't see much justification for that when you have an alternative, when you have acute pain that needs to be treated that isn't long term. The VA has a fairly good track record on this issue, where they implemented policy to avoid using opioids, and it resulted in, I think, the estimate is hundreds of thousands of fewer people using opioids or being addicted to opioids. I don't remember the exact data, but other organizations have a good track record on this because they put patients first, and it worked fairly well.
Talk to me about the dreadful prior authorization. You know, every time I think bureaucracy is as unbearable as it can become, I come across something like this, and suddenly I have to raise the bar. Talk to me about, for instance, those who want to access Jorvanax. What's the prior authorization hoops that they have to jump through?
Well, it's this Kafka-esque bureaucratic procedure where patients who really desperately need their pain resolved need to have a doctor fill out a prior authorization, which can take up to an hour, and it can take days to approve. So they might just go for the opioid. It might just be easier for everyone, right? Um, if prior authorization took 5 minutes, it wouldn't be a big deal. But it's this lengthy process. So even if it is just for acute pain or something, like they have to go through all this paperwork. And so people who might benefit from it aren't really able to get it because they're going to be in pain for days before they might be able to access Jorvanex.
And as you point out in the article, even if it worked for them, after 14 days, patients had trouble getting refills because that's how long the clinical trials lasted. So they wouldn't extend it beyond 14 days.
Yeah, and the argument is, well, we don't know whether or not it's addictive past 14 days. We don't know what will happen. But we know what happens with opioids after 14 days. After about
Right?
5 days is when you start to become addicted to them. And so I, you know, I think that that's sort of a little hypocritical. I mean, I understand and am most sympathetic to the idea that you do need to test things in the longer term. But again, I do think that there has to be some kind of allowance in a situation like this for people to be allowed to take the risk if they want to. That's my opinion. I know many doctors might disagree with me.
Let's take a couple steps back. I want to bring some personal skin into the game, if you will. People underestimate how easy it is to become dependent on painkillers. Before we went on the air, I was telling you I was shocked to find out my dad, who was a pharmacist, had been addicted to painkillers for the better part of 20 years following back and knee surgery. And I was just blown away because if anybody should know, the warnings, it would be him. I understand when you had your wisdom teeth out, you kind of had some experience there too, where the need for pain medication was very real. But when your doctor said, "Hey, do you want a refill?" What did you tell him?
Well, I told him no because I could feel myself starting to become addicted to the substance. I sort of kept looking forward to the next pill and realized, oh, something is wrong. When it runs out, I shouldn't get any more. And I went back for a checkup to check on my wisdom teeth, and the doctor told me, do you need more opioids? And I said, well, no, 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 I want them too much. Like I feel myself becoming, you know, dependent on them. And he said, but do you want more opioids? And I just kept saying no to him, even though I would have liked to have them, even though I actually did still have some pain. I just tolerated it because I knew if I kept taking them, that I would go down a dark path. And, but so I had the strength to say no to that, but a lot of people don't. And those people in that situation, unfortunately, may end up saying yes because the draw is too powerful, and then they end up becoming addicts. It's very sad.
No, that makes sense. Talk to me about what needs to happen moving forward. I think you've correctly identified there's a choke point here, at least as far as getting Journevax, into the medical scene and more broadly used. What needs to happen to rein in that tendency to want to overregulate or to play it too safe?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I mean, I think that right now institutions that are dominated by liberals who, tend to overregulate things are slowly going through a period of self-assessment. And I think there should be more of that. So someone who's been really big in talking about less regulation is Ezra Klein, right? So instead of being sort of inwardly focused on rules, be outwardly focused on outcomes. So I know that's a very general way of speaking about it, but I think that, gradually over time, and I'm sure there are a lot of doctors who are very supportive of non-opioid alternatives. We can look at how the VA has handled things like this. So, but I think slowly, gradually over time, we can change institutions, but it requires people who believe in that to engage in patient persistence over a long period of time.
Again, we are talking with Joseph T. McFadden. He is a writer and commentator with Young Voices. And I'm happy to hear you're also Blue co-chair of the Braver Angels New York City Alliance. Love Braver Angels. They do great
Great
work. Where
organization.
can where can people find you on social media?
They can go to my Instagram, Joey T. period McFadden, and then my X account is, I think it's just my name. I don't remember the exact handle. Or they can find me on the In Response podcast. So that's in response dot dot dot. And if that doesn't come up as the first result, then put my name in after and you'll find it.
All right. Got it. Hang on just one second here.